Exodus 20, 1 through 17. Then God spoke all these words: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven or above, and that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents. To the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who will love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. I guess I'm screwed. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God, and you shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land and the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox, or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Well then, that told you. Familiar text, this one. Yes, maybe for some of us, I think, probably. I mean, these are, even among those who are not necessarily Jewish or Christian, some of the best known lines of the Bible. Introduced here and then repeated in Deuteronomy when Moses sums up the entire previous 3 books into one. Because why not? Why wouldn't you do that? These are lines that many of us learned in Sunday school by heart, but they're also lines that some of us have seen over the course of legal battles over whether these particular words should be present in courtrooms and state houses. They are, of course, the 10 Commandments, or as our Jewish kindred would say, the 10 words. And since they had them first, I'll defer to their wisdom. 10 words. 10 motions of speech. The first that most of the Israelites had heard in the very voice of their God, whom they had already followed through plagues and across a parted sea, through fear of hunger and thirst, out of slavery, and into the wilderness. Yeah, into the wilderness. We often think of the Exodus as the movement from slavery to freedom. But that's not a move the humans make very easily, is it? Changing our mindsets, even in liberative ways, can be a very frightening and even grief-filled experience. In the chapters leading up to this one, we hear a frequent refrain of wanting to go back to Egypt. These people who had just escaped wanted to go back, even though the conditions there were brutal. The conditions were familiar. They were known, and therefore they were safe. Charting a new way forward feels indeed like picking one's way through a tangled wilderness, without the reassurance of a routine that assumes all our life-sustaining measures, food and drink and shelter, have already been seen to. Is it any wonder that we get ourselves out there, out into the dense tangles, and that we want to run back to safety, back to the security of all that we've known, even if it's toxic? And it is into this anxiety, into this uncertainty and longing, that God finally speaks directly to the people and gives them what is, in essence, a roadmap. Now, it is not the roadmap they want. The one they want tells them to turn left at Sinai and right at the Jordan and promised land. Checkmate, done. I think that's the roadmap we all want, isn't it? Do this, do this, do this, heaven. But it doesn't work that way. The roadmap here is indeed one that gives shape to a bigger wilderness, to the inner wilderness, if you will, of the people who have become so accustomed to oppression that it is all that they can know or imagine. And Claire, I will come back to that comment. That is important. Because the 10 words are not a random set of rules dropped into our lives, wholesale, loop, done, follow these, and only these. They were not just handed out willy-nilly because God felt like it one day. But there is a distinct context, a reason given in that very first line, which identifies God as the God who brought the people out of the location and the reality of oppression. The 10 words function implicitly in the same way that Jesus does when he says, "Now you have heard it said, but truly I say to you." When he turns those known realities onto their heads. God in this moment, in this giving of words, wants a new reality, one that stands in contrast to the one that is so safe and familiar. Because God wants the people to be on their guard against slipping back into oppressive systems. God gives in these words a scaffold on which new life is built, a life in which freedom is at the core and love is the guiding principle. So we start with God. We start with God. And that itself is already a revolutionary move because we are not, for once in the life of these ancient people, we are not starting with Pharaoh. Everything had always started with Pharaoh. That had always been their reality. We have talked in recent weeks about how the Caesar was seen in Jesus' time as a god. Well, so was Pharaoh during Moses' time. This is a recurring theme. It might still be a recurring theme. We can come back to that in the chat later if you want to. But in the opening words here, the opening salvo, if you will, God stakes God's claim as the sole focus of worship. We shall worship God, and that's it. And we shall know, what is more, we shall know that God is God because God liberates. That's how you know. God gives life, not death. Did you notice? I don't think you noticed. It was great. Even the threat of punishment, even that horrible line about they'll punish the children for the iniquity of their parents unto the third and fourth generation. Even that promise and that threat of punishment is overridden by the promise of grace and mercy, which must inherently cover even the iniquities if it extends indeed down to the 1000th generation. Not the iniquities. Nothing we can do can separate us from the love of God because the grace will always be more abundant. God is God, liberator and caretaker, the focal point of our lives through whom we are to see the world, through whom we are to understand the world, and whom we must not, it goes on to say, whom we must not manipulate to conform the world to us. Ooh. Because here's the thing. That little line about making wrongful use of the Lord's name, that is not about what you say when you stub your toe. It is not about what you say when you get your hand caught in a train doorbell. It is not about what you say when life has you down. Making wrongful use of the Lord's name is about not using God to guilt or shame people into accepting oppression as a natural thing. We make wrongful use of the Lord's name when we say that. Sorry, Bill. That's funny. We make wrongful use of the Lord's name when we say that God hates people. We make wrongful use of the Lord's name when we do what Claire mentioned above, when we call a parent who comes out. When we call someone who comes out as trans a selfish person for abandoning their family and say that that is God's word. No, 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 no. That is taking the name of the Lord in vain. That is making wrongful use of the Lord's name. And that is not of God. Because God is, we remember this, God is liberation. God is love. Oh, look. We're what, 4 verses in? 4 words? Not even. We're already in a whole new world. We are moving out of the systems of oppression that people knew. We are moving out of the oppression in which they were comfortable. We are moving into a world focused on liberation and fullness of life for all of God's creation, in which we ourselves refuse oppression and refuse equally to participate in the oppression of others whom God has made. Is it any wonder that it feels like a wilderness? I don't know what that looks like. Do you know what that looks like? That's a really hard place to be. Right off the bat, we are rejecting the values of Egypt. We are washing them aside because they are not the values of God. Right off the bat, we are rejecting the values of empire, whatever specifics they may present to us in our own wilderness wanderings. We are rejecting the values of capitalism. We are rejecting the values of competition. We are rejecting the values of hierarchy, even if it forces us into the wilderness. Now, you'd think, wouldn't you? I would think. Actually, when I was prepping this, it made sense to me. You'd think that once that God focus is secure, right? Like we know the difference between empire and God. We are going to laser focus on love. We can do this. Wouldn't you think the next step would be about humans in community? Wouldn't you think that our God focus would translate next into our interactions with one another? Yeah, this one got me too. No, because we make one tiny little stop there first. There's one little stop, quite literally. The commandment to Sabbath hinges this whole set of words together. All this really beautiful reframing of the world through the lens of God. And then we have all these fairly simple basic commandments toward the end about how we treat other people, but right there in the middle, right there. Movement from how we understand God and how we treat each other as a result. And that hinge is about how we see ourselves. Now, this commandment could be its own sermon. Some of you have heard this sermon before. Some of you will hear the sermon in the future because I promise it will come back. I like that Sabbath commandment. But for now, we will say that it is the practical move from a conscious understanding of God to an embodied practice of trust and grace. In Egypt, under Pharaoh, under the old system, under the comfortable oppressive system, right? The slaves, the Israelites, these humans who were learning to adapt themselves to new ways. They had been nothing more than cogs in a huge wheel of production, creating the literal building blocks of the towns and cities and monuments that stood to the glory of Pharaoh. And their hard work was inevitably rewarded with more hard work. That often happens in systems of oppression and slavery. And it got to the point where the life of a slave, the life of an Israelite, was valued only for its productivity, its ability to work longer, harder, faster for the sake of systems that did not love them and that did not give them life. And then God said, "Stop. I rested. You rest." And in that word of rest, we hear for the first time, literally for the first time in the lives of many of the people listening, we hear our own value apart from our labor. We hear of our own inherent value just for existing. In that one move, the liberating God of love reminds us that we have value without having to prove it to anyone else, without having to show receipts. And that when we recognize that, we acknowledge that all of creation is equally beloved, equally valuable, equally in need of rest and relaxation. It is only when we can come to that acknowledgement, the understanding of our shared humanity, of our shared belovedness in God, that we can move into the community founded on a God who liberates, on a God who loves. Only when we come to this acknowledgement of our inherent value, of the inherent value of all that God has created, only then, and in that lens, do we receive the reminder to honor those from whom we came and to honor those who surround us, to treat them with physical and emotional safety, with integrity and honesty, to treat them with the full humanity that they are due and never to objectify them. Did you see how many of those last commandments were about not objectifying people? It really kind of is that simple. Only when we come to the acknowledgement of that inherent and implicit worth that flows from the love that God pours out upon us, can that love flow through us and into the world. We are reminded in these brief words that whatever empire may try to tell us, those who surround us are our neighbor, not our competitor. They are our kindred, not our enemy. And the root of knowing this, and of living it, and of making it the reality that moves us from the wilderness to the promised land, is the love that sets us free. A love that reminds us every single day of our inherent worth just for existing. Of the love that looked at this whole creation in all of its complex beauty and decided that creation was not complete, was not good enough, was not beautiful enough without each and every one of you. Just exactly as you are. Is these 10 words were never random rules to live by, thrown up in some courthouse in order to guilt people into being good. Are and have always been the acknowledgement of the frightening nature of wilderness and of the accompaniment of a God who will never abandon us, no matter what. These 10 words are not weapons. They never have been. They are not words that we throw in other people's faces and use against them. They are the promises that abide between God and God's people, that salvation is possible, that liberation is possible, that a world without unjust systems and oppression is possible, even if we've never seen it, even if we've never known it, even if we have real trouble imagining it, and we feel like we are bushwhacking our way through the wilderness trying to get there. The roadmap is here, calling to us. No matter how tangled the vines seem around us, the love of God is calling, pulling, pushing us along every step of the way, loving us into a new reality right here and right now. Thanks be to God.